Some years back, I made a last-minute choice to go for a solo hike. I didn't usually do stuff like that, but I'd been stuck inside too long and just needed to get out for some air. I picked up my keys, tossed a bottle of water into my bag, and headed out toward this trail I'd read about once. It was roughly an hour's drive from where I lived, hidden somewhere in forested hills I'd never walked before. The drive was quiet, just me, the low drone of the car, and a blur of trees slipping past both sides. I pulled into a small gravel area close to the trail's start, parked, locked the door, and started making my way in. And that's where things start to blur. The next thing I clearly remember is being back behind the wheel, headed home, the sun sitting low in the sky like a big chunk of the day had vanished. But everything that happened in between, gone. Just this blank space in my memory, like someone had taken scissors to a roll of film and glued the remaining pieces back together. That night, I tried to put the puzzle back in place while sitting on the couch, nursing a beer I barely sipped. I could see myself arriving at the trailhead, the crunch of the gravel under the tires, and the old wood sign with the trail's name carved in faded letters. I could even recall walking into the trees, moving along the path at a steady pace. And then, just one quick flash in my mind, me standing in the woods, everything totally still. That's it. Nothing else. The next thing I'm aware of, I'm back in the car like no time had passed. It shook me more than I'd like to admit. I kept trying to figure out what could have possibly gone on, but I drew a blank every time. The next morning, I called in and told work I was sick. My head was heavy, and I couldn't think clearly. My eyes kept falling on my hiking boots near the door. They were covered in dry mud with pine bits tangled in the laces, proof that I'd actually been out there. Still, I had no memory of walking through any wet ground or brushing past trees. I started thinking maybe I'd hit my head or something, so I booked an appointment with a doctor. He checked me over, asked a bunch of questions, looked into my eyes, tapped my knees. The usual stuff. He said there were no signs of any head injury and that I seemed totally okay. He just told me to come back right away if anything like that happened again, if I lost more time. I told him I would, but driving back from that visit, I had this heavy feeling in my gut. He might have said I was okay, but I didn't feel normal. That night, I sat in front of the TV but wasn't watching it at all. I just sat there, stuck in thought, waiting for something in my brain to light up. I tried convincing myself maybe I just zoned out, like how you drive to a place you know well and don't remember any of the road. But this wasn't like that. This was hours, completely wiped out of my head. So I picked up my phone and looked the trail up again. The one I walked was called Dry Ridge Loop. It was one of those old trails, not popular anymore. I scrolled through some threads on hiking message boards, hoping for something useful, but most people were just talking about spotting deer or how rough the trail had become. Then I stumbled across a thread that was years old. A guy wrote about his time hiking that same path, and he said he felt strange the whole way, like something about the forest wasn't right. He described a part of the trail where the trees didn't look normal, skinny, warped, like they were sick or rotting. He never mentioned forgetting anything, but his description of those weird trees stuck with me. By the time I found myself spiraling with thoughts, I just turned the phone off and didn't go looking again. Days went by, then weeks, and I tried putting it all behind me. I didn't talk about it to anyone. Not family, not friends. I mean, what would I even say? Hey, I took a walk and somehow lost half a day. They'd probably think I'd lost my mind. Sometimes I'd space out and catch myself staring at nothing. Every now and then, I'd panic, thinking it was starting again. But thankfully, it never did. Still, the feeling stuck with me. Whatever happened out there, whatever made that time disappear, I feel like it's still tied to that trail in those woods. Back in the 1990s, I worked as a forest surveyor in Talarick National Reserve, tucked deep in northern Alberta, Canada. On paper, it sounded easy enough. Draw up land sketches, label tree groups, take note of any shifts in the terrain. But out in the wild, it was never that simple. The reserve covered more than 4,000 square kilometers of thick pine woods, rocky slopes, and swampy flats that could swallow you up if you weren't careful. I'd been doing this kind of work for years and had grown used to the long stretches of quiet. I didn't mind the loneliness or the days where the only voices came from wind and birds. In late August 1993, I found myself farther into the backcountry than I'd ever gone before. My pack was weighed down with supplies, and the closest dirt road was a full 3-day walk away. The ranger post was even farther. I was well and truly alone, and I liked it that way. That morning kicked off like any other. I got up at dawn, packed up my little tent, and pushed further north through thick spruce growth. I'd been tracing a stream bed, mapping how it curved through the forest, when I noticed something ahead didn't look right. The trees were crooked, leaning outward, like something massive had shoved them aside. I stopped to adjust my gear and peered through the branches. Just past the tree lean, there was a clearing, a near-perfect circle cleared right into the forest. I stepped toward it, my boots sinking slightly into the soft soil. That's when I noticed what was wrong. Everything in that circle, trees, grass, earth, was pale, drained of all color. Not burned, not frozen, just faded. The trees looked almost like bones. Their bark was cracking off in dry, powdery flakes. The ground beneath me gave a strange crunch with every step. I'd seen plenty over the years, old burn patches, bark beetle damage, and even a few places where a grizzly had wrecked a trail camp. But this was nothing like any of that. Still, something made me keep walking toward the middle. I couldn't help myself, even though a weight had settled in my stomach. In the very center was a shallow dent in the ground, maybe 3 feet wide and a couple feet deep, shaped like a scoop had been taken out of the earth. I stood there staring. There wasn't anything inside. No rock, no debris, nothing to say what had caused it. Just a hollow pit in bleached dirt. The stillness around me was eerie. No birds, no wind, just quiet. Then came this sudden chill running up my spine. I couldn't explain why, but it felt like something was watching me. Something that didn't mean well. I shifted uneasily and decided I needed to document what I was seeing. I shrugged off my bag, pulled out my old film camera, and with shaky hands started snapping photos. I got wide shots of the dead trees, close-ups of the pale earth, and zoomed in on the crater. The shutter clicked over and over, maybe a dozen pictures or more. The longer I stayed, the more wrong it all felt. I wasn't just adding another page to my survey log. This was something the higher-ups had to see, maybe even people in the science field. Once I felt I had enough, I packed my camera away and turned back toward the trail, feeling oddly relieved to be walking away from that place. I tried to reason with myself that it was probably just a weird chemical reaction or some odd fungus I hadn't seen before, but deep down I couldn't shake the unease. It made my skin crawl. It took me about 6 or 7 hours to hike back out, and though I had planned on camping for another night, I changed my mind. After seeing that strange clearing, I needed 4 walls around me. The first few hours of the hike back went okay. My back hurt from the weight of the pack, but that was normal. Then the headache began. I figured maybe I was dehydrated, so I stopped and drank a good amount from my canteen. But that didn't help. My stomach started twisting, gradually getting worse. By the time I reached the last ridge before the ranger station, I was drenched in sweat. I stopped to lean against a tree, thinking I just needed a minute to rest. Then, out of nowhere, I threw up. It hit hard and quick, and left me gasping for air. I spat, wiped my mouth, and realized something was really wrong. I stumbled the rest of the way and made it into the station just a few minutes later. The guy on duty, a ranger named Joel, looked up from his logs and froze when he saw me. I must have looked awful. Pale, drenched, wobbling on my feet, probably with vomit still on my shirt. He grabbed the radio and started calling for help before I could even speak. I don't remember what he said. My legs gave out and I dropped to the floor. I threw up again. Joel rushed to my side, his hands grabbing at my shoulders. Then everything faded. Next thing I remember, I was in the back of an ambulance. My head throbbed, my skin was soaked, an oxygen mask covered my face, and 2 paramedics were peppering me with questions. Where I'd been, what I'd eaten, if anything had stung me. I mumbled something about the clearing, about the bleached trees and the hollowed ground, but my words were all mixed up. I think I blacked out again, because the next time I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital room with white walls and machines beeping around me, and 4 was in my arm. I felt empty, like everything inside me had been drained. A nurse spotted that I was awake and went to get the doctor. He was a thin, tired-looking man with glasses. He told me I was lucky. Their best guess was that I'd picked up a nasty virus, maybe from an insect bite. They had pumped me full of fluids and antivirals, and he figured I'd be well enough to leave within a few days. I nodded, though my throat was dry, but my mind went straight to that weird clearing. I knew it wasn't a bite. I told him about the patch of white trees and the dent in the ground. He wrote something down and gave a polite nod before leaving. Said he'd take it under consideration, but I could tell he didn't believe a word of it. I guess people in his line of work hear all kinds of rambling from sick, delirious patients. I got discharged 3 days later. I was weak but able to walk again. Back at headquarters, I handed off my camera to my supervisor, a gruff older guy named Bennett. He asked what I'd seen and I gave him a rundown. Then I waited in the break room while the film tech developed the pictures. I needed proof, something to show I wasn't hallucinating. Some park offices still had photo darkrooms in those days for this kind of thing. About an hour and a half later, the tech came back, face unreadable. He laid the prints on the table and my heart sank. Every single picture of that clearing was just a fuzzy white smear. Not too dark, not too bright, just static. Nothing. The rest of the roll, the earlier shots from before I found the spot, looked fine. But anything after that point, gone. I remember gripping the edge of the table with both hands. The tech muttered something about a bad roll, but I could tell even he didn't believe that. Bennett didn't say much. Told me I'd had a rough trip and needed to rest. Nobody flat out said I was lying, but I could feel it. The side eyes, the hushed tones when I walked into a room. They thought I'd imagined the whole thing. Fever dreams, they figured. I tried explaining it all, that the symptoms only started after I'd left that clearing. But no one really listened. Without proof, I was just another guy telling stories. Eventually, Bennett asked me to drop it. Said it was unsettling the crew. So I kept my head down, did my job, and went back to logging trails and measuring tree stands. It helped me pretend I'd let it go. But I hadn't, couldn't. Every time I was back out in the forest, I'd catch myself watching the tree lines, half expecting to spot another glimpse of that pale clearing. I wanted to find it again. I wanted to mark it on the map and get answers. But at the same time, I didn't want to bring anyone else near it, either. That's why I stopped talking about it. But I did start telling rookies to steer clear of anything that looked strange. They'd laugh, thinking I was messing with them, but I meant it. The woods aren't just bark and leaves. Sometimes they hide things that make you sick, things that don't belong. Years passed. I retired in 2004 and moved down closer to White Hollow. The nightmares faded, but that memory never left me. I'm an old man now, nearing 70. My hands shake worse than they used to, and my knees ache whenever I stand, but my mind's still sharp, and I still think about what I saw out there, that day in '93. I kept those ruined photos in a plain envelope tucked away in a desk drawer. Sometimes, I pull them out and just stare at those ghostly white smudges, wondering what really happened. I've read up on it over the years. I considered the idea of a meteor, but it doesn't make sense. No debris, no heat blast. If I'd been exposed to radiation or chemicals, surely the doctors would have seen something in my tests. I won't say I believe in aliens or anything like that. I figure there's probably a simple explanation. I just can't think of one. I'd like to know. But now, at my age, it probably doesn't matter. One thing I do know is this: if I ever come across anything like that again, I'm not taking photos, I'm not investigating. I'm turning right around and getting the hell out of there. Several years back, sometime around March of 2010, if I'm remembering right, I had just finished the winter term during my first run at college and was trying to enjoy a bit of spring break. Me and 3 friends figured we'd take advantage of the warm weather since it was the first truly sunny day of the year. I'm from Northwest Oregon, and there's the scenic road that follows the shoreline between Glen Cove and Stillwater Bay, north of the Columbia Sound. It's called Windcliff Drive, and it's a pretty cool road to take a drive on. For a while, it hugs the rock wall with a steep drop to the ocean below. Along the way, there are a few little spots you can pull off to check out the view or take some photos, typical tourist stops. The four of us drove up there and pulled into one of those lookout areas, planning to hike down to the water, have a few drinks, eat something, and just enjoy the day. The trail we chose led down to a narrow strip of land where a railway ran close to the shore, much like the road above. This matters because that track sees a lot of foot traffic from wanderers, drifters, and all kinds of odd folks. While we were sitting on some big driftwood logs across the tracks from the water, we saw a bunch of them walk past. None of them gave us any trouble, and we didn't mess with them either. But a lot of them had blankets or tarps wrapped around them. Not really unusual for the area. We probably stayed there for about an hour before realizing it wasn't as fun as we'd expected. It was peaceful but kind of dull, so we figured we'd head out and find something else to do. On our way back, we noticed a trail that looked a lot easier and less steep than the one we had come down on. So we went for it instead, and that's when the whole vibe of the day changed. Not long after we started hiking back up this other trail, we all noticed something lying off to the side of the path. It was clearly a blanket or a comforter of some kind, wrapped tightly around something. You could see it was covering something solid, not huge, but definitely big enough to be concerning. Right away, we all got the same awful feeling. It looked like it was hiding a body. I remember repeating in my head over and over, "Please don't be a kid. Please don't be a kid. Please don't be a kid," as we slowly walked up to it. Thankfully, it wasn't a child, but sadly, it was a dog. The dog was clearly dead. Its head had been removed, cleanly, just above the collar, which was still around its neck. There was no sign of blood anywhere, and the fabric it was wrapped in looked like it had just come from someone's laundry basket. Clean, no dirt or stains. Even stranger, there was no smell at all, so it couldn't have been there very long. Someone had also torn down branches and plants and arranged them to try and cover the body. From the looks of it, whoever left it there didn't want it to be spotted from the train tracks, which were only about 10 or 12 feet away. It was obvious this was no accident. Someone had killed this dog and left it there, hidden just enough to avoid attention, but not well hidden if someone actually walked past. We were all shaken. No one said anything for a moment. Then we looked at each other, turned around, and climbed the rest of the way back to the road as fast as we could. We got to my friend's 4Runner, jumped in, and sped out of there as quick as we could. Later that evening, we called the county police about it. But from what we could tell, they weren't very interested. They told us it was probably a stray that had been hit by a train. When we mentioned that its head was gone and there was no blood anywhere, they didn't say much. We never heard anything back after that. Maybe they didn't go check. Maybe they did and just didn't care. Either way, I haven't driven back down that road again. Not once. At the base of the Vosges Hills, the name Julian comes from an old tribal word meaning woodland, which fits well since most of this mountain range is blanketed in thick forest and meadows. Unlike the neighboring Alps, for example, the lower height here has allowed these woods to flourish. The region carries a deep background of myths and spiritual practices, most likely because of the many groups that have lived here over the centuries: Gauls, Romans, and others. Let me say first that this isn't really a horror story. It's more of a strange and kind of eerie experience than anything dangerous, at least in my view. When I was younger, I just thought of the Vosges as a great place to walk around and enjoy. I'd often go hiking or pitch a tent with friends. But as the years went on, I started noticing that the area had a certain kind of spiritual feeling to it. That could just mean the old churches or the ruins of 11th century abbeys scattered around, or it could be something more subtle, more personal. That's the part one want to talk about today. Around 5 or 6 years ago, while out biking or hiking, I began spotting strange things. Bits of cloth tied to tree branches, stacked stones arranged with purpose. At first, I brushed it off as kids messing around, or maybe something related to scouts or school groups. But after a while, I started to think these objects might actually carry deeper meaning. I found wide, circular rock patterns on hilltops, stones linking trees in strange shapes, piles of small rocks laid out like symbols. I also noticed markings, some that looked like old scripts or runes, scratched into tree bark. I'll admit, seeing all this felt a little odd and out of place. It had an unfamiliar, almost ritualistic quality. Eventually, I figured out that some of what I was looking at might be tied to sweat lodge practices. Now, I'm no expert in this, but from what I've read, Sweat lodges are linked to spiritual ceremonies, some inspired by Native American traditions and others more modern adaptations. Not long after, I even witnessed a couple of these gatherings taking place. I'd be riding my bike and see a few parked cars, sometimes with things like feathers or beads hanging from the mirrors. These were usually in remote spots off the side of narrow mountain roads. A little deeper into the forest, I'd hear faint sounds, chanting, drumming, or movement, so I'd follow the noise. Being naturally curious, I wanted to know what was going on. The first time, I spotted a group setting up a dome-shaped lodge. They were gathering firewood and laying out what looked like makeshift sleeping spots near the setup, possibly for people to rest in shifts before the event at night. I didn't want to intrude, so I kept my distance. But I did run into one man who was carrying sticks. I greeted him politely in French, and he nodded back in a quiet but respectful way. He didn't seem to be from around there, unlike the rest of the group who looked more like locals. Maybe he was some kind of instructor. He wore loose dark red clothing, the kind that's often seen in spiritual gatherings. The second time I saw something similar, it was in another location and may have been a totally different group. What struck me then was that a few small children were present. For those who don't know, sweat lodge rituals can be pretty extreme, even dangerous. They're tough on the body and mind, sometimes even fatal. For kids to be involved, it seemed risky. These ceremonies involve building a covered hut with a pit inside and a fire built just outside. Large rocks are heated in the fire until they're glowing, then carried inside and placed in the central pit. Water is poured on them to create thick, suffocating steam. Along with this, they sometimes use tobacco bundles, herbs, and in some cases, substances that can affect the mind, though I have no idea what exactly was being used here. Even without anything psychoactive, just the heat alone has been enough to cause harm in past cases. I could only hope the children weren't actually taking part in the ceremony itself. The next morning, I went back to that site just to look around. What I found was strange. There were small pouches hanging from the frame of the hut, probably tobacco or herbs. Stones were laid out in complex designs on the ground. Some trees had carvings or symbols I couldn't recognize. And the creepiest thing was a piece of bone, about the size of a hand, sitting perfectly balanced on a chopped tree stump. So no, this wasn't a terrifying experience exactly, but it was definitely a weird one. It gave me a look into a side of the forest I hadn't known existed. Something spiritual, maybe even secretive, that had been going on around me without me ever noticing it before. The story took place with my dad, though I only heard about it not too long ago. He was searching for a tent that I had borrowed a while back, and I had to confess it was destroyed during a drunken night by the nearby creek. A whole different story for another time. Back when my dad was 17, way back in the summer of 1978, he and my Uncle Darren were the adventurous sort and liked to stay active during their time off. That year, after finishing school, my dad wanted to take on one big journey before starting full-time work. They chose the Bracken Trail. If you haven't heard of it, the Bracken Trail is a 270-mile walking route in the UK that, depending on which direction you take, starts in southern Scotland and winds down into central England, ending near the Midlands. Usually, people take 3 to 4 weeks to complete it. With a long summer ahead, my dad, his 16-year-old brother Darren, and a friend named Leon were dropped off at the starting point in Scotland by my great-grandfather to begin the trek. The first several days were great. They ran into some friendly folks who even cooked for them and offered beds for the night. They enjoyed the sense of independence and freedom that came with the trip. They usually camped in open areas, but one day they pushed themselves to go an extra few miles to reach a town. They needed to restock food and pick up some spare tent stakes. They reached the small village around 6 in the evening and noticed that the local tavern was just opening up. After settling in with a couple of drinks, my dad recalled that the pub owner probably guessed they weren't old enough, but seemed glad for any customers. The owner even told them they could pitch their tent in the backyard field behind the bar. The man's wife seemed unsure at first. She looked worried and whispered something to him in private, but in the end, that well-known local kindness must have won out. After a night of heavy drinking and chatting with the locals, they crawled into their tent. My dad said they were using a hanging oil lamp attached to the tent's center pole for light. When they turned it off, they left it hanging, which mattered later that night and the next day. My dad woke up early and switched on the lantern while thinking about getting up and walking around the field. Since the owners had been nice enough to let them stay, he didn't want to overstay. That's when he heard a door creak open and then close again. He didn't hear any steps, so he figured it was just an old shed door moving in the breeze. But a few moments later, the quiet sound of someone walking in grass began. Soft at first, but clearly coming closer, until it stopped right outside the tent. My dad assumed it was the pub owner just checking in on them. As he reached for the zipper, the tent flap suddenly came open. My dad said the odd part was the man didn't have a shirt on, only loose pajama pants and slippers. When my dad asked what he was doing, the man mumbled something about hearing a strange noise, like a growl, and wanted to make sure they were okay. But my dad hadn't heard any growl. The only noises in the last few minutes were the door, the footsteps, and the zipper. The man oddly stressed how important it was to get solid rest before a long day of walking, and then tapped the oil lantern with his fingers, suggesting it be turned off. He then walked away, letting out a long, irritated breath as he got near the house, and then closed the door behind him. Next morning, the wife made them some breakfast while they packed up their stuff. The owner took down their tent himself and then left in his 4x4 without saying anything or returning to the house. They thanked the woman and asked her to thank her husband as well. She replied she would, when she figured out where he'd gone, as he had driven off early and hadn't been back. Later that afternoon, they reached the next spot marked for camping, just beside a small brook, a little earlier than planned, about an hour and a half ahead of schedule. So they decided to take it easy for a bit. After walking roughly 130 to 140 miles over 8 or 9 days, they had earned a break. When they pulled out the tent, they noticed a bunch of tiny holes, each one about the size of a pen's width, as my dad described it while holding a pen in his hand. Everyone was confused. My dad tried to explain it by bringing up the mention of an animal the night before. He told the others it must have come back and chewed through parts of the tent during the night. Leon suggested they walk back a couple of miles to the previous village to try to get a replacement. They left the damaged tent behind to mark their camping area and hiked back. Luckily, they found a shop aimed at hikers. Unfortunately, the place didn't carry tents, but they bought tape and planned to patch up the holes just for one night, hoping to find a new one soon. As they returned, the sky darkened quickly, and they mostly relied on the moon to see the path. But when they reached their site, they were stunned. Their tent was already set up, but it was completely on fire. The whole thing was in flames. They dumped all their water bottles onto it and filled them again from the nearby stream to eventually put it out. Once the fire was out, they looked inside. The glass from the oil lantern had been broken. Someone had followed them, put up the tent again, smashed the lantern inside, and caused the fire on purpose. My dad believes the only possible explanation is that it was the pub owner. He thinks the man's plan got interrupted when he saw that my dad had been awake, and maybe this fire was his twisted way of sending a message. At first, I thought my dad was just trying to mess with me, but when I casually mentioned the burning tent story to Uncle Darren during a phone call, he immediately launched into how strange that trip was. And the thing is, Uncle Darren has never been one to make stuff up. I was working on a search and recovery crew that got sent out to Rain Rock National Forest back in the summer of 1984. The call came in late on a Wednesday night, right as I was clocking out. Tom Erickson, a local outdoorsman who'd been hiking those paths for years, hadn't come back from one of his usual solo outings. His wife had waited until Tuesday evening before contacting us, assuming he'd just extended his trip. But by Wednesday, with no sign of him, she gave us all the information she could: what he packed, what he wore, and where he had planned to go. His last known location was a starting point near the Maple Creek trailhead, and his intended destination was a ridge roughly 9 miles north. First, it looked like a typical job. Tom was experienced with that forest, and we had a good starting spot. I'd have been willing to bet my paycheck we'd have him found before dark, but it didn't turn out that way. What was supposed to be a routine operation ended up being anything but. Local police and nearly 4 dozen volunteers joined the effort. Just before sunrise on Thursday, we all met at the trail start, loading up with radios, maps, rope, medical kits, and headlamps. We split the whole area into zones. My group took the west side by the river, and the rest moved eastward. The idea was to sweep north, reach the ridge by evening, locate Tom, and bring him home. At 5:47 a.m., we headed out. The first few hours were uneventful. We moved slowly, eyes peeled for any signs like bent branches, disturbed soil, or footprints. We called his name now and then, but the woods stayed quiet. Then, around noon, one of my team's voices crackled over the radio. He'd spotted something. I changed course and hiked about a half-mile toward them. When I arrived, the group was staring up into the trees. There, roughly 30 feet high, was a backpack. The thing was torn wide open, straps dangling, its contents scattered through the branches and on the forest floor. From the look of it, we knew instantly it was Tom's. Just as his wife had described, green canvas, red patch stitched along one side. One of our guys, Rick, offered to go up. He rigged a rope and harness while the rest of us stayed below. The tree wasn't thick. Its limbs didn't look like they could hold anything too heavy. Yet somehow the pack was stuck up there, like it had been hurled with real force. When Rick brought it down, the damage was clear. The fabric had deep slashes running across it. Not bite marks, not claw tears, more like something sharp had shredded it. Inside, his water bottle was cracked. A sandwich, half crushed and soggy with dirt, lay among crumbs. But there wasn't any blood. Not yet. That changed a couple of hours later. Another one of the group radioed in. She'd found a boot in a small clearing. I went over, and sure enough, it matched what Tom's wife said he'd worn. Brown leather hikers, laces tied, standing upright like he'd stepped out of it mid-stride. No blood, no damage, just a single boot sitting by itself. We marked it and kept moving, assuming the second one wasn't far off. We were wrong. About an hour after that, another team called from the far eastern side of the grid, almost 2 miles away. What they said turned my stomach. They'd found the second boot, but it wasn't empty. Tom's foot was still inside. It had been severed just above the ankle. The cut wasn't clean. The skin was torn ragged, the bone snapped, not sawed. A few flies buzzed around it, and the blood on it hadn't dried yet. Still sticky. That told us it hadn't been there long. They snapped photos for the report, sealed it in a bag, and continued. But something shifted after that. The woods seemed heavier. I'd seen bad accidents before. Falls, maulings, even gunshot wounds. But this? It didn't look like anything I'd seen. A bear might attack someone, sure, but not leave a cleanly cut foot miles away from the other boot. It didn't add up. We redrew the search pattern into smaller zones. And soon after, we began noticing blood. The first time I spotted it, it was smeared on a tree trunk. No bigger than a coin, just at eye level. A teammate found another smudge 10 feet away, higher up. Then someone else pointed out small dots sprinkled across some lower cedar branches. We marked each one with flagging tape. Before long, we realized there was no real pattern. The blood specks were everywhere, scattered through the woods like someone had been dragging a soaked cloth along the trees. A few feet in any direction and we'd find more. The spread was random but constant. By late afternoon, we'd covered nearly half the grid. Still no body, no clothes, just his bag, the boots, and the blood. The light started fading. Fog drifted in. We bunched closer as a team. Not much talking, just marking blood trails and searching. Night came quickly. We stopped near the ridge and made camp. The idea was to rest and continue at first light. But I couldn't sleep. The silence felt wrong. Not just quiet, empty. No rustling, no birds, not even wind. Just stillness. Around midnight, I heard a branch crack, loud and sharp, maybe 80 yards away. I sat up, flashlight ready, and scanned the trees. Nothing moved. I stayed there a while, waiting. The woods didn't return to normal. No insects, no nighttime sounds, just quiet. It felt like something had silenced the forest itself. I got a couple hours of sleep once my shift was over. Dawn didn't make me feel better. We packed and pushed north, following the blood signs. They kept going, smudged on bark, dotted along limbs, some so high up I had to lean all the way back just to spot them. One red streak was 10 feet up on a pine with no nearby branches, still wet looking, like it had been placed there during the night. That chill in my gut came back. Another teammate spotted drops forming a half ring on a rock. Someone else saw more blood smeared in a line across moss on a fallen trunk. We gave up trying to understand the layout. We just kept going, hoping to find Tom, or what was left of him. By noon on Friday, we reached the far edge of the search boundary. But between the foot, the blood, and the missing gear, hope had nearly run out. We finished our sweep and called it. The official search ended late on the third day. Tom was declared deceased. Nobody could lose that much blood and still be moving. We passed it over to local investigators and hiked out. When I reached the start of the trail again, I turned around for one last look. The trees were still. The mist had returned. Technically, Tom hadn't been found inside our search zone. But deep down, I felt like that wasn't the whole truth. The report said it was a wild animal, bear attack, that explained the torn-up gear and the foot. But I didn't buy it. Bears don't throw backpacks 30 feet into treetops. They don't smear blood over trees, rocks, and logs in carefully spaced streaks. I've seen bear attacks. The mess they leave behind is brutal but chaotic. Bones, ripped bodies, entrails. Not this. This was calculated. Tom Erickson was officially presumed dead. His body was never recovered. It was one of 3 failed recoveries we had in the 80s. Most of the crew left the field after that, moved into other jobs, but I couldn't shake it. That bag in the tree stuck with me. Sometimes I'd picture it dangling, slashed, unreachable. I'd remember the foot, torn off like someone had yanked it, then placed it there for us to discover. And I'd think about the silence, the crack of that branch, the feeling that something had been watching. We didn't speak of it much. One of our team, Mark, kept in touch the longest. Years later, I asked him what he really thought happened. He just said, "We didn't find him because he wasn't meant to be found." I understood what he meant, but I didn't agree. Tom was still there. I knew it, from the way the blood kept appearing, fresh even on day 2. Whatever took him didn't just kill him. It scattered him across the forest, bit by bit. It wanted us to see it. Another teammate, Kara, left the field a year later, moved out of state, didn't leave contact info. Rachel faded out too. Not missing, just unreachable. Rick, the guy who climbed the tree, stayed in the Park Service but changed. Quieter, drank more, took a desk job eventually. We never really discussed that mission again. I think we all carried it differently, but we all carried it. I still have the map. The blood spots are marked. Little red XS drawn across the grid, stretching like a spiderweb. I rarely take it out. When I do, it still gives me chills. Tom was gone, but something else stayed in those woods. Waiting, watching, still there. We never searched again. A few years back, I went hiking by myself along different trails in the Smoky Mountain area. For some reason, I figured it would be fine for a woman in her mid-20s to do it alone. Not the smartest idea, I know. I had always wanted to see Clingman's Dome, so I made the drive up there. It was a Tuesday, so not many folks were around. The trail to the top is paved, so the walk isn't too hard, though it does get pretty steep. At the time, I smoked a lot, so I was totally out of breath. When I finally reached the summit, I moved off to the side, trying to get my breathing under control. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone stepping up really close to me. I glanced over and saw it was a man, maybe in his late 40s, with oily black hair. He said, "Hey, I saw it took you a while to get up here, and you're breathing pretty heavy. Are you all right?" I was a little surprised, but told him I was okay. Said I was a smoker, and gave a little chuckle to lighten things up. He stood there, staring at me, so I gave a small nod to signal I was about to move away. I walked over to one of those boards that show you which way you're looking and what landmarks are off in the distance. He trailed right behind me, Then, out of nowhere, he started rambling about how he'd just gone through a divorce and was part of a guy's group that traveled across the country visiting big tourist sites. He asked where I lived, and I told him. Then he started sharing way too many personal details about the split. He said he suspected his wife was seeing someone else, so he hid in their closet one night and caught her in bed with a coworker. He muttered that both of them paid the price for that night. I tried to show with my face and body language that I was uncomfortable, but he just kept talking, throwing out questions without giving me a second to reply. I figured maybe he was just lonely and needed someone to talk to. But then it hit me. I hadn't seen anyone with him. There was no group around. Maybe they had split up for a bit? That's what I told myself, anyway. Still, I was starting to feel uneasy, so I told him I was going to head back down to the gift shop. He followed again. There were plenty of small trails that split off from the main path to the top, but I wasn't interested in exploring them, not with how winded I still felt. I wasn't walking next to him anymore, but he kept coming after me. He suddenly called out loudly, "Hey!" I turned and saw him grinning wide, his hair looking even more greasy now. Then he said, "Why don't we take one of these side trails? I could really show you a good time." I responded sharply, "No thanks." To my left, I noticed two older ladies sitting on a bench. They'd clearly been watching the whole thing. One of them spoke up and said to the man, "I think the young woman needs to be going now." I gave her a small smile and nodded. I turned around and walked quickly down the path, passing by the gift shop and heading straight to my vehicle. He didn't follow me that time. That was my last hike of the day, and I'm grateful nothing worse came of the encounter. Now, I don't go on solo trips like that anymore. Some years back now, my buddy Marcus and I set off on a hike along the remote shoreline path known as the Fog Ridge Trail. We'd been walking since early daylight, following the narrow track, cracking jokes about dumb stuff from the office, and just soaking up how calm everything felt out there. By midday, my legs were screaming, and I could tell Marcus was feeling worn out too. So we paused to check our bearings and grab a break. We found the small open patch just off the main trail, where a wide, flat boulder sat, perfect to rest on. I shrugged off my backpack, pulled out my water bottle, and took a big gulp while Marcus opened up the map. He was always the one better at figuring out where we were, so I let him handle it while I sat there catching my breath. Marcus was mumbling quietly, tracing the map with his finger, trying to pinpoint our spot. When it happened, a massive shadow swept over us, like someone had flipped a switch and dimmed the whole place. This wasn't some passing patch of shade. It was huge, enough to darken the entire clearing. I remember freezing mid-drink, water trickling down my chin as I looked up, but the sky above was still clear, that perfect endless blue without even a hint of cloud. Marcus noticed it too. He suddenly stopped talking and jerked his head upward just as the shadow moved on and the sunlight came back like nothing happened. "What was that?" His voice had a sharp edge, unsettled. I didn't say anything right away. My eyes were scanning everything above and around, tree branches, the sky, trying to find something, anything that could explain that shadow. But there was absolutely nothing. No planes, no birds, and this was way before drones were even a thing. I couldn't think of anything that could have cast something that large or moved like that. So quick, so quiet, almost like it floated over us. Then the wind came. It blasted in suddenly, strong and icy, rustling the treetops and blowing dust across the path. It wasn't your usual breeze. It felt like it was chasing whatever had flown past, like it was part of the same thing. The hairs on my arms stood up. Marcus turned pale. He slowly lowered the map and spun around, scanning the trees. "You saw that, didn't you?" I just nodded. What else could I do? We stood there, unmoving, for maybe a minute or two. My heart was pounding like crazy, and I could hear Marcus breathing heavy beside me. The forest was silent. No birds, no buzzing, nothing. It was like everything had paused, like the whole place was waiting, just like we were. I kept expecting something to come bursting through the woods or drop from the sky, but nothing came. The sun shone again, bright and warm like it had never disappeared. "We should leave," I said. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed the crumpled map and stuffed it into his bag, and we started moving. Neither of us said it, but I knew we both wanted out of there, fast. We didn't even stick to the trail on the way back. We cut through shrubs and low branches, taking the fastest way we could figure. I kept looking up every few seconds, half expecting that shape to show up again. I knew Marcus was doing the same. Every little gust or rustle made me jump. I had this creeping dread, like whatever it was could return any moment. Took us about an hour to get back to where we started, though it felt like twice that long. I was drenched in sweat by the time we saw the little dirt lot. Marcus's old truck was still there, and I don't think I've ever been so relieved to see a rusty blue pickup in my life. We tossed our gear in the bed and climbed in, slamming the doors shut. We sat there for a while without saying much, breathing, watching the trees in front of us. After a few minutes, Marcus finally broke the silence. "Probably just a bird," he said. "Like, I don't know, an osprey or something flying low. Sometimes the shadow looks bigger than it is, right?" He didn't sound like he believed it. I could hear him trying to convince himself. "Yeah," I muttered, nodding even though I didn't buy it either. "And that wind, just a coincidence," he added, starting up the truck. I could hear the tension lifting in his voice, like saying it out loud made it okay. "We're probably just messing with ourselves over nothing," he said. I wanted to agree. I really did. A bird made sense. Maybe a vulture or a large eagle that flew in just the right way to make its shadow look massive. And sure, the gust could have been random. Weather shifts fast out there. But deep down, I knew better. The shape we saw, it was solid. Not thin or vague like a bird's shadow. It was thick, heavy, and the way it moved, fast but smooth, wasn't like anything I'd seen in the sky. We drove back to town with the radio on, just low country songs filling the silence between us. Marcus would glance over at me every now and then, and I could tell he was still shaken. So was I. When he dropped me off, he didn't hang out like usual. No cold beer, no talk about the hike. He just said he'd catch me later and drove off fast, like he couldn't get away quick enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the shadow, the wind, and that moment when the forest just went silent. I told myself we were being ridiculous, like we were kids imagining monsters, but I couldn't let it go. Weeks passed, and we never brought it up again. Life kept us busy, work, errands, bills, pushed the memory aside. I even went hiking again, though I stayed away from that part of the coast. Nothing strange happened. But still, on bright, clear days, I find myself glancing up, not sure what I'm expecting to see, just watching. That shadow still sits in the back of my thoughts, and I can't shake the idea that whatever caused it wasn't some ordinary bird. Late one night, I actually searched for answers. Typed stuff like huge shadow sky woods and strange flying things no sound into a search engine. I scrolled through pages of theories and blurry photos. UFOs, cryptid birds, secret military tech. But none of it really fit. Not exactly. Whatever we saw or didn't see felt different. Felt like it didn't belong. I started thinking of all the weird possibilities and ended up just closing my laptop, feeling dumb for even bothering. Marcus and I still catch up now and then, but we don't hike much anymore. Not that we said anything about it, we just stopped making plans. I think we both know why. That day out there, it changed something. We can joke around like we used to, but there's this quiet thing between us now, a memory we don't bring up. Sometimes I wonder if that thing's still out there, circling above the forest, waiting. I'll never forget how small I felt that day, standing in that clearing, staring at the sky for something that never showed its face. I don't know if it meant harm, but I do know in my gut it wasn't normal. When I was a kid, my family always enjoyed being outside. My dad served in the military and was posted at a base near Ogden, Utah, so we often drove out to Logan Canyon, especially during autumn when the leaves turned brilliant shades of orange and red. It took about an hour to get there, but the gravel road was always nerve-wracking. It clung tightly to the mountain on one side with a steep drop-off on the other. Cars would sometimes pass each other slowly with barely any space between them and the edge. I used to glance out my window and see tiny trees far below, and it would give me chills. One particular trip from the mid-1990s stands out. I was excited because we were going to sleep in a tent for a change, which didn't happen often. My dad had back problems, so most times we just went for the day or stayed in cabins. But that time, we brought an old tent from the 1970s that we picked up at a yard sale. It was me, my mom and dad, my brothers and sisters, and our 2 dogs crammed into the car. We arrived at a spot near a stream sometime in the late afternoon and started putting up the tent, laughing as the dogs darted around each other. We made a small fire, roasted some hot dogs, and after the sun went down, we put the flames out and crawled into our sleeping bags. I drifted off to sleep to the sound of water running over rocks. But a little later, I woke up. One of the dogs was quietly growling, his fur standing up, and I thought maybe it was a rabbit since we'd seen some hopping around earlier. Then I heard it crunch, crunch, footsteps just outside in the woods. I froze up completely. Someone was out there walking around near our tent. I was so terrified I could barely take a breath. The steps got closer and then started moving slowly in a circle around the tent. The dog's growling got more intense, but I didn't move. I was too scared to do anything. I could hear the person moving about, maybe looking through our things. At one point, I heard them try the car door handle, but it was locked. Was it a hiker who got turned around? Or was it someone with bad intentions? I heard the footsteps again, heavier now, close to the side of the tent. I shut my eyes tight and hoped they would leave. The dog let out a sharper growl, and after a moment, the footsteps began again, quicker this time, heading away. I laid there, my heart hammering in my chest, until the sounds completely faded. I don't know how long I stayed still like that. Then I heard my dad's voice whispering. He'd been awake through the whole thing too. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was shaken. After waiting a few minutes, he quietly woke up my mom and the rest of us and said we were packing up. We didn't speak much, just rolled up our sleeping bags, took down the tent with our flashlights, and threw everything into the car. Even the dogs stayed close, still tense and alert. It was around 1 in the morning when we pulled out onto that winding road. The canyon was pitch black, and as we drove, I kept staring out the window, half expecting someone to appear in the dark trees. My dad mentioned he'd seen a few vehicles full of college-aged kids heading up earlier and said maybe it was one of them messing around, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. We made it back safely, but I didn't sleep at all that night. None of us did. Was it someone lost trying to find help? A thief going through camps for stuff? Or someone living out in those woods just watching us from the trees? I'll never know for sure, but even now, all these years later, whenever I hear footsteps crunching on dry leaves in the forest, I feel my heart skip a beat. By early 2015, my friend Jake and I had been trail partners for years. We had wandered through the dense woods of Oregon and Washington, fried ourselves in the dry heat of the Southwest deserts, and climbed together in the Sierra Nevada. But our next goal was the vast Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness, or just the Frank as most call it. Our plan was to hike deep, camp out, and see whatever the place had in store for us. We packed our gear, left from Northern California, and made our way towards central Idaho. The drive took us 2 full days, first following the I-5 up north, then turning east into the rugged heart of the state. Before long, the sheer size of the Frank was laid out before us. 2 million acres of remote, wild land, easily the largest terrain we'd ever tried to tackle. We stopped at a gravel lot near the middle fork of the Salmon River, where a worn-down sign warned about fire restrictions and bears. We popped the trunk and pulled out our packs, heavy with food, a tent, sleeping bags, water filters, and all our essentials. Everything we needed to survive was strapped to our backs. That first day, we stuck to the trail. The forest was peaceful, not silent, just calm. We made steady progress through pine and fir, covering around 8 miles before setting up camp beside a small stream as night fell. Day 2 was more of the same. Deeper into the woods, following winding paths that dipped into valleys and climbed up ridges. The undergrowth thickened as we went, covering parts of the trail completely. We didn't talk much, just hiked, ate trail snacks, Checked the map now and then to be sure we were still on course. By the end of the second day, we found a flat area, pitched the tent, and heated up some instant noodles with boiled creek water. We were beat. 18 miles in that landscape felt like double. But we were in sync with the wild and hungry for more. On the third day, restlessness set in. Not boredom, more like craving something raw. Marked trails were for tourists. We were out there to find something real. So when Jake suggested we go off-trail and see parts of the Frank most folks never set eyes on, I agreed without hesitation. We turned off the beaten path, and right away the woods changed. Trees got thicker, their trunks massive, roots twisting across the ground like veins. Moss hung on everything, dimming the sunlight and muffling our steps. The forest floor felt soft underfoot, almost like a sponge. We had to move slower, ducking under branches, climbing over deadfall, but the trade-off was worth it. The place felt untouched, like we'd stumbled back into some ancient version of the world. Then Jake froze, tilted his head, like he'd heard something strange. A moment later, I heard it too. A low hum, constant, out of place. Not the wind, not running water. It didn't belong. It sounded mechanical. Neither of us said a word. Curiosity pushed us forward. The noise got louder as we moved. Eventually, we broke through a cluster of young trees and saw it. A bunker, half sunk into a rise in the ground. The steel door was slightly bent, not fully shut. The outside was concrete, scratched all over with strange symbols. Circles, jagged lines, random scribbles that didn't mean anything to me. The hum was coming from inside. As we got closer, we realized it wasn't just a hum. It was music, heavy, distorted metal with howling vocals, echoing out through the cracked door. Jake and I stopped just feet away, not daring to go closer. The sound was intense, almost angry, maybe hardcore punk or death metal. But it wasn't the music that had us frozen. It was the idea of whoever was playing it. Jake looked at me. Yeah, maybe it was just a group of people partying in an old underground shelter. But what if it wasn't? I glanced at him and tipped my head slightly toward the way we came. He nodded. We turned back, trying to get distance before sunset. Neither of us wanted to stick around to meet whoever was inside. But we'd barely made it a few hundred yards when they found us. We were talking quietly about who in their right mind would build a bunker way out here when two guys stepped out from behind the trees, like they'd been waiting. Dressed in camo, faces hidden behind balaclavas. Both of them holding rifles that looked like AKs. Barrels pointed down but held firm. I stopped cold. So did Jake. I could hear him breathing fast next to me. We were both trying to figure out how bad this was going to get. They didn't move at first, just stared at us through those dark eye slits. The music was still faintly playing behind us. Then one of them raised his rifle. Down on your knees. Hands up. His voice was sharp. No emotion. No wiggle room. I looked at Jake. He was slowly moving his hands toward his shoulder straps. I could tell he was weighing our odds. We had pistols buried in our packs. Completely useless now. We were outnumbered, outgunned. I started to raise my hands, slowly, stalling. Then Jake moved. He let his pack fall and bolted. The moment I heard the thud of his gear hit the ground, I snapped out of it. I ditched my pack and ran too. A gunshot cracked the air above me. Bark flew from a tree beside me, spraying splinters. I ducked and sprinted through the trees, dodging trunks, matching Jake's pace. Then I heard yelling behind us, "Hold your fire! We need them alive!" That should have calmed me, but it didn't. More gunshots rang out. They were aiming low now into the dirt near our feet, trying to slow us down, not kill us, make us easier to catch. My legs burned. My lungs felt like fire, but we kept going. Jake stayed ahead, leaping over logs, and I was right behind. Eventually, the gunfire stopped. We ran for what felt like miles. Maybe it really was. When we finally stopped, we were drenched in sweat and gasping. Jake leaned on a tree, listening. Nothing. No voices. No gunshots. No footsteps. Just the breeze in the trees. We'd lost them, but we'd also lost everything else. Our packs, our food, gear, even our maps were all gone. Taken. It was a nightmare scenario, but there was no time to complain. We had to keep moving. No sleeping bags, no tent. That night, the cold sank into my bones. My stomach growled constantly. We huddled next to a fallen log, zipping our jackets up tight, trying to make it through. I didn't sleep. Not really. Every sound in the dark had me scanning the shadows, expecting rifles to appear. Jake stayed awake too. We didn't say anything. When the sun finally came, we were starving. We found some bitter wild berries growing low to the ground and ate a few, knowing enough to avoid the poisonous stuff. But they weren't enough. We followed the sunlight, using it to guide us south, hoping it would lead us back to the trailhead. I had a pounding headache, but we had to keep walking. The forest seemed endless. My boots rubbed blisters into my feet. We stopped just once or twice to scoop water from a stream with our hands. That second night, we found a rocky overhang to lie under. We didn't risk a fire. No food to cook anyway. I dozed in tiny bursts, waking at every sound. The third day was the worst. My legs barely worked. We found more berries, a few roots Jake recognized. But it wasn't enough. My vision blurred, and I started zoning out, just following Jake's footsteps. He didn't look any better. We never once talked about the bunker or the men chasing us. We just kept walking. When we hit a dirt track, barely more than 2 ruts through the woods, I could have cried. A road, a real road. We staggered along it until a ranger station came into view. Small, wooden, with a weather-worn truck parked out front. We were filthy, scratched up, hollow-eyed, the ranger inside. An older guy with a gray beard and faded uniform took one look and said, "You boys look like hell. Let me grab you some coffee." We told him everything. The bunker, the music, the symbols, the armed men, the chase. He called it in. Police showed up an hour later, took our statements, sent out a couple rangers to the spot. We were hopeful, but they came back saying the place was empty. No people, no supplies, just the empty structure, still covered in weird scratch marks. No sign of our packs. The police didn't seem shocked. One of them said the Frank had long been a hotbed for militia groups, people training or hiding out, far from public eyes. He figured we crossed paths with one of the more violent ones, the kind who don't like witnesses. Said we were lucky to walk away. He told us not to go back, not through that part of the wilderness. That was it. No answers, no arrests, just a warning and a shrug. Jake stayed quiet on the drive home, staring out the window. I had a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, running the whole thing over and over in my head. The wilderness had always been our place, our retreat, our freedom. But now it felt different, cold, watchful, dangerous. Jake and I didn't hike again for a long time after that. A few years back, my buddy Lex and I started out on a big cross-country road trip. We planned to drive from Boston to San Diego, winding our way through the states over about 6 weeks. We were both in our early 20s, didn't have much cash, and since my mom used to be a truck driver, I figured we could save a lot by sleeping in the back of our small SUV. It was actually a pretty decent setup. We got some used blankets and sheets from a thrift store and cut one of them to make makeshift curtains. By the end of week 1, we were pros at turning the back of the car into a bed in under 10 minutes. Bags pushed to the front, curtains hung up, bedding spread out, and we were set for the night. We usually crashed in parking lots, public campgrounds, rest areas, anywhere that looked somewhat safe and wasn't illegal. After that first night, we never really felt uneasy sleeping in the car. That is, until the very last week of our trip, somewhere in Arizona. We were close to Prescott and had fully settled into our rhythm by then. There was no strict plan, and we never drove more than 3 or 4 hours a day. Outside of a couple of places we really wanted to see, we mostly just picked our next stop the night before using Google Maps or took advice from people we met along the way. Other campers, folks at gas stations, or even waitresses. We also got good at talking to strangers. We ate at a diner with some locals we met at a site, hung out with an old rancher who taught us to line dance at a dive bar, played guitar with some guys in a rainstorm, and were fed by tons of friendly campers. We even spent the 4th of July with a family that pretty much treated us like their own. Almost every new person we met turned out to be great. This night didn't seem like it'd be any different. We found a free camping spot online and followed GPS directions deep into the woods. It was way out from town, and something just felt off the moment we arrived. There was an RV sitting near the start of the site and 2 other cars parked further in, deeper among the trees. We stopped by the RV first, and a guy stepped out. Lex gave him a quick wave, but he just stared at her, face blank. Then, like nothing had happened, he slowly shut the door again, still staring. Thinking maybe he just wanted to be left alone and didn't want noisy neighbors, we drove farther down the path and parked in a flat clearing. Instead of setting things up right away like we normally did before sunset, we messed around a bit, laughing, snapping silly pictures, and smoking. Lex pointed out a campfire glowing farther down the trail, so we thought we'd go be social. We'd met tons of awesome people just by offering someone a drink or saying hello. So we headed over. There were 2 guys at the fire, the same ones from the cars we'd passed. They seemed all right at first, drinking and chatting, so we sat down and joined them with a beer. After a bit, we realized they hadn't come together. The older man was clearly on something. He kept spinning in circles and mumbling about aliens, but he seemed mostly harmless. That left us talking to the younger guy. He said he used to work as a park ranger. He was charming, relaxed, and we chatted with him for hours about our trip and life back home. Then he brought up a bear he said he had seen earlier in the woods nearby. Lex thought he was joking, but he pulled out a camera and showed her a few pictures. The bear was really close to where we were camping, and we were both a little nervous. Either one of us would sometimes leave the car at night to pee, so the idea of a bear hanging around made us uncomfortable. The guy just laughed, but then his whole tone changed. It's hard to explain. His voice got sort of cold. He said, "If you leave your car during the night, it's not a bear you need to be afraid of." I waited for a laugh or for him to give Lex a nudge, some kind of joke, but nothing. I chuckled awkwardly and made a dumb remark about creeps in the forest. Lex laughed too and threw in something about horror movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We tried moving on, but 5 minutes later, he brought it back up again. He started going off about something dragging us out of our vehicle in the dark. No matter how much we changed the topic, he circled back around to that idea. Serial killers getting grabbed, people disappearing in the woods. Meanwhile, the older guy was completely spaced out, staring up at the sky. We kept sipping our drinks and tried to act normal, hoping the subject would finally drop. Then the ranger guy stood up and walked off toward his cooler to grab another drink. By now, it was totally dark out, and we couldn't see anything beyond the campfire light. Suddenly, I noticed a little red light glowing in the shadows. Took a second, but I realized it was a camera. He was taking a picture of us. The screen on the back of his digital camera lit up. Now, normally, people we met did ask to take photos with us. Lex is beautiful. Dark wavy hair, striking blue eyes, like a young actress, and we were outgoing. So pictures weren't that weird. But this time, he didn't ask. He didn't say a word. He didn't even hint that he was snapping one. We were both just sitting there, frozen, watching him. He didn't seem to think anything was off. He looked down at his screen, adjusted some settings, and took another photo, this time with the flash. No say cheese. No group selfie idea. No reason given. Then he came back to the fire, sat down again, and never said a word about the pictures. Lex and I were both seriously creeped out. We made up a reason to head back and get our camp ready. We got up quickly. The older guy smiled and told us to have a nice night. But the ranger gave us a weird smile, one that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Be careful out there. There's more than bears in these woods." Every single hair on my neck stood up. Lex let out a forced laugh and grabbed my arm, dragging me away. We hurried back toward the car, using the RV as a landmark to find it in the dark. We jumped into the front seats. Lex was breathing hard, near panic. "Why did he take our pictures?" she asked. I was shaking. I read somewhere that sometimes killers take photos before they, She just stared at me, then hit the door locks. "Do you think he took pictures of us? Like for later?" We were both rattled. She turned on the headlights, and I yelled at her to shut them off. We didn't want him knowing exactly where we were parked. Somehow, It was the only night we hadn't set up our sleeping area yet, so there was nothing to pack up. Lex threw the car in drive and floored it. As we sped down the dirt road out of the campsite, I looked back, and that guy was walking toward our car. Same blank, cold face. Summer of '96. I was 10 and already frightened of almost everything, so this whole event only made that worse. My mom and I drove up from Lynn, Massachusetts, to Pawtuckaway State Park in New Hampshire for a short camping trip. My dad was going to meet us there the next morning because he had to finish some work stuff. Everything at the site seemed normal. We pitched our tent, got a fire going, and things felt fine. It was still light out when we noticed a man alone at the campsite next to ours. He had stringy, oily hair and kept running at a wooden post, jumping up and trying to balance on one foot at the top. He kept doing it again and again and again. It was strange, but we figured he was just some oddball and laughed about it a little. My mom joked he might be trying to join a circus or something. Then came the night. It was pitch black out except for the fire we had going. My mom and I were sitting close to it, roasting marshmallows, when we suddenly heard footsteps coming from the direction of the other campsite. Out of the woods came the same man. In the firelight, he looked pale and dirty. I could tell by my mom's posture that she was on edge. She asked him what he needed. He muttered something. "I need some help over at my campsite." We both stayed quiet for a moment, waiting for him to explain. My mom then asked what kind of help he meant. He said, "I locked my keys in my van. Need someone to come help me get them." Then he turned to me and added, "It's fine, kid. You can stay here with your fire." That gave me chills. My mom responded, saying she didn't think she could help him get into a locked van. He asked if she had a spare wire hanger lying around. My mom told him she didn't, but he kept going. "You've got to have one somewhere. Maybe dropped near your tent." My mom repeated that she didn't have one. Then, trying to sound firm, she added, "My husband will be getting here pretty soon. He might be able to help. He's pretty strong." The guy paused for a second, then said quietly, "All right," and turned back toward the dark. But just as he started walking away, he turned his head and added, "If you do come across a hanger, come over. I'll be here." And with that, he disappeared into the shadows. Neither of us slept much. I remember hearing my mom sit up at every twig snap and movement outside. She must have stayed awake for hours, scared something sharp might come slashing through the tent wall. Finally, morning arrived. We unzipped the tent and stepped out. Right away, we saw that the strange man and his camper van were both gone. Later that day, I heard my mom gasp. I ran over to see her holding something up near the side of our tent. She didn't say anything for a while, just stood there staring. In her hand was a wire hanger.